I'm Joel Paulson. I'm the Community Development Director for the Town of Los Gatos. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's community meeting and thank you for participating in the process of the update of our housing element. Participation is one of the key elements in the success of an effort like this, and we want to thank you. I want to thank you again, and I hope you find the meeting this evening very informative. And now I'll turn it back to Andy. Thank you.
Andy, you are muted, just to let you know.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Joel, for that introduction. And we want to express our sincere gratitude for working with you on this process. It's been a pleasure. We've been working with you and Jennifer Armour, Planning Manager, Jocelyn Schupman, Associate Planner, and Aaron Walters, Project Manager, who won't be with us tonight, but who has led us fearlessly through this process to where we are now and will continue to do so. My name is Andy Flower. I'm Principal Planner at EMC Planning Group. We've got a robust team here with you tonight. You'll be hearing a little more from Tamala Fish later on. She's our Zoom coordinator. We've also got Lee Robinson from Be the Diversity, our equity educator. Also Kristen Masters, nonviolent communication specialist. You won't be hearing so much from Rachel Kane, Lauren Herr, and Chris Kiefer because they'll be working behind the scenes. So you'll be seeing their words more than hearing them, though Rachel will be leading us through the mapping exercise, which is the culmination of what we hope you'll take home and maybe do some homework. Our agenda this evening, part 1 is the housing element update overview. Part 2, we'll be discussing the importance of equity and we'll have a short Q&A session. Part 3, the town strategy for sites overview and ways to provide feedback. And our fourth part, which will be the lengthiest part of our session today, is a live Q&A session. So we look forward to learning about what your questions and comments are as we move forward. We've got a dedicated housing element website and it's called engagelosgatoshousing.com. Here you can see a QR code. We'll be referring to this website throughout, and we'll also include this link at the bottom right corner of slides further into the presentation. And Tamala, will you help share a little information about Zoom logistics?
Absolutely, thank you. So if you are calling in, you can call us today at 1-877-402-9753. And our conference code number is 602463. So if you drop off for any reason, you can call in. During the live Q&A section, rather, if you are calling in, please use the *9 to raise your hand. You can also use it to lower your hand, and *6 will unmute yourself so you can speak. We will also be using, I believe, the Q&A icon. I've spoken about this to you before. As an attendee, you may submit questions at any time. Panelists may reply to your questions directly in this Q&A tool, or they'll wait to answer it during one of the Q&A sessions. And once again, I'd like to remind you that please do put all of your questions here. If we do not have time to answer them today, they will be answered at the website later. And we will also be using the raise hand tool. Panelists will ask attendees to raise their hand in response to some of the questions throughout the presentation. And later on, attendees can also use the raise hand tool to ask a question during the live Q&A session. And this would be when our phone listeners would use the *9. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamala. We're going to start with an overview of the housing element update. We're not going to dive too deep. We do have some additional resources available on the website, but we want to make sure that everybody feels welcome and that we meet you where you're at. So we're going to start with a live poll. We'd like to get a little understanding of who's in the audience today, who's in the room. And Tamala, do you want to ask the question?
I will. So there should be a box that is jumped in front of you that asks, how often have you joined this kind of public meeting about planning policy? And there's some different options you can choose from. This is my first public meeting. I have attended some public meetings. I regularly contribute at public meetings. Now, maybe you can't find this poll. You may need to hit escape, the escape screen. So your Zoom window will minimize a little bit. It might be behind it. I do see that quite a few people are participating. Thank you. We're going to give you just a little bit longer to find it in case it's behind the full screen of your Zoom window. That would be the escape button to bring that down, and you can find it there. Well, I do see we still have a few people participating. My goodness. We're going to give you 3 more seconds to find this and choose how often have you joined this kind of public meeting about planning policy. This is my first public meeting. I have attended some public meetings. I regularly contribute at public meetings, and we will end the poll in 3, 2, 1.
Well, these are some exciting results.
Indeed.
We see 10 people who for whom this is their first public meeting. Welcome, welcome. We hope you'll engage and participate. And for those who have had some experience, welcome also. And goodness, for those who have contributed regularly at public meetings, we count on you to also share your experience and to maybe encourage others who are a little new to this to jump in and model what it's like to be engaged in these kinds of processes. So Tamala, have we shared the results?
Yes, I did share the results. I'm sorry. Let's
Fantastic.
reshare. Yeah.
Great. So 24% are first-time public meeting goers this evening. 41% have attended some public meetings, and 34% regularly contribute.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what is a housing element? What is it that we're working on right now? This is big picture. This is a visionary yet detailed policy document. It is only one chapter of the full general plan. It's required by state law to be updated every 8 years. And it just so happens to coincide in the town of Los Gatos to coincide with the general plan update. So the full general plan with all of its chapters, including this one for the housing element, they are all being updated in this year. So setting the stage to accommodate existing and projected future housing needs for people of all income groups. What we'll be doing more specifically, we'll be selecting sites where new housing should go. We'll also be anticipating how many units could be built on the potential sites that are selected. And this chapter will also outline programs and policies to encourage development. It's important to note, though, that the town does not build the housing. What we're doing with this process is we're making sure that there's the capacity and the predictability for housing to be developed in certain locations. So in putting this together, it takes many roles for housing to be developed in a jurisdiction. And so we have developers, city staff, policymakers, current neighbors, and future neighbors. We're inviting everyone to be a part of this process so that the resulting policy is reflective of the community needs and desires. The decision makers and the policymakers on the local level include the Planning Commission and Town Council. Regionally, ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, and we're going to be talking about a couple of acronyms here, so we want to be sure to spell them out. So you may hear them again later on in the presentation. In the end, we'll be bringing an adopted housing element update to the state for HCD to certify the document. So first it gets adopted by the town council. And it gets done so through assistance through ABAG. And then HCD will determine whether or not. So the roles in Los Gatos, EMC Planning Group, our team, we work closely with staff, and we also meet regularly with the Housing Element Advisory Board. We welcome public engagement and feedback, and we synthesize that and incorporate that into our proposals that we then present to the Planning Commission through public meetings so that we have more opportunities to gather public feedback and incorporate it into a draft that we then bring to Town Council. And then we bring it to HCD. So here's another acronym, and it has its own way of pronunciation, and we describe it as RHNA. But what it technically is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So it's the number of homes that is understood as to be needed now and through this 8-year cycle, this next 8-year cycle for the housing element update. We will see what the chart looks like, the number, and you'll see that it has varying affordability levels. You might wonder where this number comes from. Well, there's a whole number that was anticipated for the state of California. So HCD determined a number for the entire state. And then they allocated a certain number to the Bay Area region. And that's when the Association of Bay Area Governments, and it's not a small body, it's a whole lot of representatives from throughout the entire Bay Area. They came together and they made determinations of where those numbers should be allocated throughout the Bay Area so that there is a number specific to the town of Los Gatos. This is the total number, 1,993 units. I want to bring your attention to the income group levels and help you understand that when there is inclusionary housing required for a development, affordable housing is understood as part of very low income, or moderate income. And that means that out of this entire table, 68.6% of this number, so that would be row 1, 2, and 3 combined together, that is 68.6% of this full number, 1,993, is understood to be affordable housing. That's what's anticipated as the need for Los Gatos, and that's what we need to plan for. We need to make sure there's enough capacity, and we need to make sure that there is enough predictability through the process for developing that housing. So the consequences of non-compliance, and non-compliance means if the town of Los Gatos did not have a certified housing element, then the town would be would have limitations for state funding, not only housing related, but also transportation related. It would also expose the town to potential lawsuits. And those lawsuits could happen from HCD. They now have a compliance arm that is both funded and staffed. They could also be vulnerable to lawsuits from the public and to housing advocates. Further, there could be court mandated compliance and legal fees, also court imposed fines, and the worst consequence, this is sort of in a sequence, receivership, and that would involve suspension of local control on building matters and court approval of housing developments. Our job is to help make sure, to the best of our ability, and in working together with the town and with all of the people of the town, that we avoid these consequences. We want to help bring the town to a place of compliance with the state, with HCD. So right now we're looking at the sites inventory, and that's the beginning of this timeline. Other than, of course, we've begun with analysis and review, and we'll be making that available to the public to be able to share comments about that. But today, what we're focused on is sites inventory. Soon, we'll also be incorporating policy development ideas, and we'll be putting together a draft that we'll be sharing with the public. We'll then be bringing a final housing element through the approval decision maker process, as mentioned earlier, with public hearings, so that we may then bring it to HCD to request certification. So next, you're going to hear from our wonderful teammates, Lee Robinson and Kristen Masters, who will help us learn about what it means to lead with equity. Lee and
Right.
Kristen.
Thank you so much, Andy. I just want to jump off and begin by welcoming everyone. And I want to encourage us to all take a deep breath, a big inhale and a big exhale. We've been talking a lot about housing element, the process and numbers and policies. And for this next section, I really want us to really get into our feelings around this, right? I want us to think a little bit about how this may relate to our own personal experiences, okay? We're going to be talking about the importance of leading with equity throughout this process. Okay, that's going to be one of our milestones to a lot of the work that we're doing. I want to take a few minutes to go into equity a little bit deeper. You may be wondering, well, what is equity? Okay, you may have heard that word and you may not have heard that word, and that's totally fine. We're all meeting each other where we are. So when I talk about equity, I like to look at this image, equality versus equity, because I'm sure folks have heard of the word equality and equity maybe, and you're probably thinking, well, what's the difference? What does this mean? So if we're looking at this image here, right, we have these people at a ball game, okay, and they're watching the baseball game, and there's a lot going on. People are watching, looks like folks are in there having a great time. These folks are standing here watching the game from outside. So if you look at this image, on the left side, which is equality, everybody has the same box, right? The far left person has a box. He's watching the game, enjoying the game, right? In the middle, that person's also watching the game. They're kind of hanging on the fence, but they're still able to watch the game and enjoy the game. The third person can't see the game at all. They're on the smallest person on one box, they can't see the game at all. So they're not able to enjoy the game, to be a part of that experience and just be at the ball game, right? So that's equality. Everyone has the same amount. On the right side, we have equity, and that's what we're talking about today. We have equity. And if you look at this, you notice immediately that there's something different. There are a different number of boxes distributed there, right? So far left, this guy, he doesn't have any boxes. He's still seeing the game just fine, right? The person in the middle, they have the same as before, and they're still watching the game, still enjoying the game. However, the person on the far right, now they have two boxes. So now they can enjoy the game, they can watch the game, they can be a part of what's happening, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about equity. And some of you may also be wondering, now wait a minute, isn't equality, doesn't that mean equal, right? Doesn't equality mean everybody has the same thing and that's fair? But as you can see here, equality isn't always better. It isn't always fair, right? And I also want to bring something else to your attention about this actual image. And some people bring this up, is that why are these folks standing outside the park in the first place, right? Who has access to the game? Who doesn't? We can even be relating to that directly. Who has access to the neighborhood, to the community, and who doesn't, right? So when we're talking about equity versus equality, we are talking about needs, okay? Not a one size fits all, okay? We're thinking about who needs what and making sure we provide those needs. So when we're exploring this housing element update through an equity lens, we're getting engaged. We're having conversations about needs, and we're realizing that people's needs and circumstances are different. We get to hear voices that may not have been heard in the past, and we get to actively seek out those voices and work to address those needs. Also, with this, sometimes we get to navigate challenging conversations, difficult feelings maybe around fear or access, resources, right? And we get to have those conversations, and we get to think about what it actually means to be inclusive, what equity actually looks like within our communities. So when I say we're going to be focusing on equity, we're going to be more engaged. And I want to hand this piece off to my colleague, Kristen, who's going to ask you all another question about this process.
Thank you, Lee. So in order to be inclusive and in order to invite you in, we want you to really be honest with us by using the raise hand function, no, a poll, sorry. How much do you trust that your voice will be heard in this housing element process? This will help us have a sense of what's there for you. Yeah, and the options, I fully trust my voice will be heard. I have some concerns, I have significant concerns, or I don't trust it at all. This gives us a sense of how we're reaching you, and just to know that we're going to do everything we can to attempt to build trust during this process. You get to notice at the beginning here how it is going in. And you might be thinking as you're answering this poll, see the numbers going up some, thinking about what would help build trust for you. Are there questions you have that you can put into the Q&A or ask later? Is there a way that you can be engaged that will help you have a sense that your voice does matter in this?
And Kristen, if you don't mind, I just want to take one moment in case someone joined us late and you don't see what we're talking about. It may be hidden behind your full screen. If you hit the escape button, upper left-hand side, should resize your screen and you'll find a pop-up box that has the poll written. How much do you trust that your voice will be heard in this housing element process? And it looks like our answers are winding down. And we will close in 3 seconds. That will be 3, 2, and 1. I'm ending the poll now. And I have now shared the results.
So by doing this, you get a chance to see who you're sitting with in terms of their trust that their voice is heard, that their concerns are significant or not. Thank you so much for being willing to do that with us.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Now we get into, thank you all for also taking that poll, right? And when we ask you about trust, that's huge. That gets, I don't know about you all, but when someone asks me about trust, that gets in my feelings, right? And we have some concerns. Of course we do, right? Of course we have concerns. That gets also into our next slide about why does the town need to plan for more housing? And this piece is around care. When it comes right down to it, it's about care, caring for our neighbors, right? Caring for our community, caring for our neighbors. We all want to be safe. We all want to be seen. We all want to have the things that we need, right? Caring for our neighbors, ensuring fellow residents can continue to live here, can have what they need, maybe don't have to work here and then drive 3 hours home, right? Can live in this community and be a part of it. Caring for our community, becoming more inclusive by creating housing opportunities for all community members. And folks, again, back to that poll, yes, there are concerns and how we can have both, right? We can have our concerns and we can have our voices heard and also figure out how to be creative and figure out how to make sure that we're being equitable. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Andy, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of those legislation that's in place for that.
Andy, you may still be muted.
Thank you. It's raining here. I don't usually mute myself. That I apologize. It lets you know I'm not in California, sadly. But yes, this is probably the biggest difference between the 5th and 6th cycle housing element update, that the state is mandating that affirmatively furthering fair housing be considered with every step of our housing element update. And so that's true when we go to choose sites, that's true when we consider policy, and that's true for our outreach. We need to make sure that we're following this new legislation, AB 686, which is defined by taking meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination that overcome patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity based on protected characteristics. So our goals for AFFH, again, another acronym, for affirmatively furthering fair housing, is that we address significant disparities in housing needs and in access to opportunity, that we replace segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns, and that we foster and maintain compliance with civil rights and fair housing law. Lee and Kristen,
Thank you so much, Andy.
thank you.
Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Okay, so after what Andy just talked about a little bit, now we get to go back to why does the town need to plan more housing? And right back to the caring, right? This is where we get to, again, think about caring. What does it mean to care for our neighbors? What does it mean to really care for our community? And we might come up really quickly with, oh, this is what it means to care for my community. And I encourage us to dig a little bit deeper, further past what you think is the first thing that comes to your mind about caring for your community. Because what we might find is when we go a little bit deeper, that's where it might get a little bit challenging, right? What does it mean for me to really care for someone else? It might mean that I may have to look at my own resources in a way that's not comfortable. I might have to look at my own positionality that's may not be comfortable. And that's okay, right? Because we get to do that work. We get to find out specific needs from each other. We get to hear these needs from each other. We get to be heard by each other, right? So just a reminder that as we're talking about equity, these are some of the things we're going to be doing. These are some of the things we're going to be talking about. It may be uncomfortable, it might be scary, but we're going to be right here with each other and go through this process together because it's important. It's very important. Thank you so much.
So I want to, in that way, I want to ask you a series of questions, and you'll get to raise your hand for this. It's really both to have you think and be able to express what's true for you, and to get a chance to see who else is out there and what their experience is. So the first question is, have you experienced housing insecurity now or in the past? So you get to notice, and you can raise your hand based on whether, yes, if you've experienced housing insecurity yourself now or in the past.
And if you've called us on the phone today, you can use the *9 to raise your hand.
Thank you, Tamala. And I just want to say that this is a remembering for those folks of a great deal of vulnerability in that place. It's a hard situation to be in. So we'll take a beat so that people can find that and express themselves. And then the second question, do you hold concern for family, friends, maybe important service providers in your life who have difficulty finding affordable housing? So you get to raise your hand if you notice that you hold concern for family, friends, and service providers, that you may be putting in input into this process based on your concern for people in your life. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot more hands going up at this point, 12. 14. And just when Lee was talking about those feelings, you get to tell how that impacts your life, to hold concern for folks, knowing that they're having difficulty finding affordable housing in order to live close by. Okay, and now the third question. You can let us know if you hold concern about the impact of density on things like traffic and water and other aspects, other resources within your community. If you notice that there's concern there. All three of these could be true. I just want to say that they're not distinctly different groups of people. It can be that you have multiple different places that you hold concern. That makes sense. And again, there were like 13, I think, for that. Thank you. Thank you for letting us know one little snippet of what's true for you. And it just helps, I think it helps us, and it also helps you see who else is there with you and what they're thinking about, what they're worried about. Okay.
Well, thank you, Kristen and Lee. Thank you for helping us lead with equity and see this opportunity through that lens. Highly value that. And I did notice that for each of those three questions, we had about a quarter of the audience raise their hand. We're all in this together. So now we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of the sites inventory. We're going to help you understand why we're doing this. So what is a sites inventory? So this is just one important component of the housing element process and final policy document. And it's a specific list that demonstrates to HCD where and how the town plans to accommodate the assigned 1,993 housing units. So as we've been working with town staff in assembling this list of sites and an interactive map that we'll be introducing to you soon, we want to help you understand the context for which we arrived at these sites. So the number of sites swelled and shrunk and swelled and shrunk because we're looking through the HCD checklist for things like property size, and what we know is that there's been
Hey,
enough study
Andy.
to. Yes.
I
Lauren?
so apologize for the interruption. I
Sure.
realized that we skipped a very important section. We want to make sure we have a short 10-minute question and answer section before we dive into the sites. So I think
course.
somehow that slide disappeared. So we can keep it on this slide, and Kristen is now going to read some questions that we can answer for the group.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I want to thank those of you who are in the background culling through Q&As and typing it out so that it's easy for me to find and ask. So the first question is, what is the definition of affordable housing? And that's a question that we thought Andy might answer.
Sure. Well, there are different levels of affordable housing, and the way that HCD is, or the state, the Department of Housing and Community Development, who will be certifying this element, this housing element, they are wanting us to consider a certain percentage of the housing we have that we create capacity for to become affordable. And it is a proportion of what the median income is considered for Santa Clara County. So I believe we have that chart on our website. If we don't, we'll make sure that it's there, so that if you would like to better understand what income levels fit into which of the categories that we just saw, we will include those numbers it is something that moves over time, but we will be capturing this moment in time so we can easily make that available so that you can understand what income levels would correlate with each of those affordable housing categories.
Great, thank you. So people can look on the website for more specific information. Thank you for that question. So the second one, can properties zoned hillside and for commercial be included as sites for the housing element?
I think that's a question better suited to Joel.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the question. The hillside residential, there aren't any vacant sites. Well, sorry, there aren't any sites that are going to be on the site's inventory in the hillside residential. And that's for a number of reasons, but one is, as was mentioned earlier in this webinar, the town is not proposing to change the density in the hillside residential zone. As far as commercial zones go, yes, almost all of these are in commercial zones. And those changes to some of those land use designations include things like increased density and increased height. And so again, those are more functions of the general plan. So I encourage you, if you haven't already, take a look at the draft 2040 general plan. There's a separate website for that, and that can be accessed through the town's main website. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Joel. I believe this question is for staff. I'm concerned about impacts of new housing in town, and are the potential impacts on traffic, schools, water rationing, and utilities considered during this process?
Thank you. And again, this goes probably more a level up, which is to the general plan. Again, we have the draft 2040 general plan. There has been a final EIR prepared, which is also available on the website, which addresses impacts of that nature. Additionally, over time, as projects get developed, they're evaluated on their own individual basis to ensure that there are no impacts from those to those particular elements. And if there are impacts, then there may be things that need to be improved, such as traffic improvements and or in lieu fees to pay for future improvements down the line.
Wonderful, thank you, Joel. And another one to you. I'm curious about the sites which have chain stores on them. Did those stores indicate that they would leave the area or site anyway, and would a landlord terminate the lease if a site is being selected?
Thank you. So this is going to be an iterative process. For those of you who might have looked at the last Housing Element Advisory Board agenda, we actually had a much bigger swath of sites on that. This is a paring down of that. We're going to have to, once we come to a point where we've selected sites, we think we have some numbers, we're going to have to do some additional, we're going to have to reach out and get some additional information from some of those property owners, which is a little bit different than last cycles. The last cycles, you didn't really have to provide additional justification as to whether or not those might turn over in the next 8 years. One of the tools we're using that Andy mentioned earlier, I believe is or he's going to mention later, if he didn't mention it earlier, is a site interest form. We're going to be sending those out to property owners. So that will be available on our website, and that will be one of the tools that we will use. This isn't meant to be an exercise where we say this site has to be developed and we expect the property owners to impact the current tenants. That's not what the exercise here is. It really is looking at sites that may have potential. And then we will have to, through the work with our Housing Element Advisory Board and the public, kind of dive deeper into those. And we may hear from some of those property owners that, no, we don't have an interest in being included on that inventory. And in that case, those would be pulled off. So again, this will be iterative and it will be moving over time. And it probably won't get larger. If it does get larger, it will probably be at the expense of maybe some other sites that weren't interested, and some sites that we maybe thought weren't going to be interested expressed interest. So it will be an ongoing iterative process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joel. So this question to Andy, to provide input on the housing element, do you have to be a resident of Los Gatos? You're muted though.
Thank you. No, in fact, we welcome all participation, particularly for those who would like to live in Los Gatos and who are having difficulty otherwise finding a place, finding a home.
Great. Thank you. And I think we've got time for one more, and this one's for Joel. Are Senate Bill 9 projects permitted on a residentially zoned property in Los Gatos?
Thank you again. Interrelated, but a little off topic from where we're at tonight. But yes, SB 9 projects are allowed on residential lease owned properties throughout all of California. We have an urgency ordinance that has been adopted, which sets some additional parameters that will be moving into an effort for a more permanent ordinance amendment to address SB 9. We actually just recently got a little bit of what was called a fact sheet, but with many disclaimers as far as it's really informational only. But we will be pursuing that and additional guidance from the state as we prepare a more permanent ordinance moving forward. And that obviously will be a public effort as well. We definitely will want folks to be part of that process. And so please, if you're not on the notify me on the town's website, I suggest you get onto that so that you can be aware of a lot of the various efforts throughout town that are going on, not only on the planning side, but across all of our departments.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joel and Andy, for answering those questions. Thank you to members of the public that that posed those questions. And thank you for the behind the scenes folks who are making everything work really well so we can move on again, Andy, to the sites. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for moderating those questions. We appreciate that. So we're going to dive into the town strategy for selecting these sites. I'll not repeat these slides, but I'll jump to this one. So how we came to this list of sites, we kept in mind those parameters that HCD makes clear to us, like property size. It's been studied and revealed that it's less likely for sites that are less than a half acre or more than 10 acres to be developed in a way that is capable of supporting affordable housing specifically. It doesn't mean that those sizes wouldn't be or couldn't be included in our list, but there certainly is higher level of due diligence required for any site that is of those sizes. If a site had been recently developed, then it was removed from our initial list. If there were environmental constraints, such as being in a very high fire hazard area, then we chose to not bring that site forward. Sites can still be added going forward. We made sure that the pipeline projects or projects that have entitlements and maybe only need building permits from this point in order to be developed. We take property owner interest very seriously because we are learning from HCD that with the 6th cycle, there is this higher due diligence for selecting sites to show that there is a reasonable chance that these sites may be developed within this 8-year cycle. ADUs are an important factor in our list making, and HCD has provided guidance about how to project that number based on the number of ADUs that have been built in the last couple of years. SB 9 projects are an interesting opportunity as well, and for that, if there is a property owner in Los Gatos who thinks that they might like to develop their site according to SB 9, or any property owner of either on our list this evening or not in a commercial area, mixed use area, or multifamily area, who would like to develop their site to come to our property owner interest form and help us understand that you have an interest in including your site. So the general strategies for sites. Jurisdictions can use the following strategies to identify additional sites. So we can make changes to the town's general plan, which is ongoing. So that does happen to coincide with our process right now. Rezoning and or adopting programs and policies. So a combination of these strategies are necessary to accommodate the full amount of housing needs allocated with the RHNA number of 1,993. So I'm going to welcome now Jennifer, our planning manager, to lead us through the unique sites that we have on our list today. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you and good evening. And I want to start by saying how exciting it is to see that we've got 63 people with us joining us this evening. So I'm really excited to have you all joining us for this discussion. For those of you who have previously joined us for discussions of the general plan, you may recognize many of these sites and areas under consideration and how they align with the community place districts. Not all, but those were identified as potential areas where redevelopment might possibly happen. I'm going to walk you through the different groupings of sites that are included in this tool and hopefully familiarize you with these sites and provide some information about known redevelopment interest or components of what's on the site at this time. So for the first district, it's the downtown district. So Andy, if we could, thank you. So there are 7 sites here. 2 of them are particularly included because of previous interest shown by the property owners. So the post office, for example, that property, they submitted an application for Conceptual Development Advisory Committee in 2017 for a mixed use development. And the property at 50 Park Avenue and 61 Montebello Way, we've also received interest about redeveloping that property from the property owner. So in some cases, these are ones that have particular interest that's been expressed, or other ones where it seemed like there might be some potential. So then on the next one, we've got North Santa Cruz Avenue District. This one, we've just divided it into 2 sites for consideration. The Los Gatos Shopping Center, which is on the east side of North Santa Cruz Avenue, and the Walgreens Shopping Center, which is on the west side. The next site is the Los Gatos Lodge District. That's one site altogether. It's on Los Gatos Saratoga Road between Los Gatos Boulevard and Highway 17. It also abuts the high school. And so we're considering this site for a number of reasons, actually. It was previously considered as a potential housing site under the previous housing element cycle. They have come in with a Conceptual Development Advisory Committee application in 2019, and there has been ongoing interest and conversations with the property owner about potentials for redevelopment. The next district is Los Gatos Boulevard. It actually is broken into 28 different sites. So there are a lot of individual sites on Los Gatos Boulevard. It extends all the way from Van Meter Elementary School all the way to the northern town border with San Jose. This district was originally developed as an automobile-oriented corridor. So it's got a mix of standalone retail, office, car dealerships, and several neighborhood serving shopping centers, such as Blossom Hill Pavilion, Kings Court, Cornerstone, El Gato Village, and Los Gatos Village Square. So any of these, even as commercial sites, could potentially be redeveloped as mixed use with housing incorporated. The next site is the North 40 District. So that's kind of an extension at that northern end of the Los Gatos Boulevard District. And that is the remaining 20 acres of the North 40 specific plan. We did recently take a Conceptual Development Advisory Committee application that was proposing mixed use development on the site for review. So there is clearly interest and potential for redevelopment of that area. The next site is Lark Avenue District. Here again, we've broken it into 2 different sites for consideration. There's a site that's directly north of the Jewish Community Center, the JCC, and one across the road from that directly to the south of Los Gatos Swim and Racquet Club. The next site or district is the Winchester Boulevard district. There are 4 sites for consideration here. You've got the town's last remaining affordable housing overlay zone from the previous housing element update. That's at 110 Knowles Drive. We also have the Vasona Station Shopping Center and a couple other sites. On the Pullard Road district, this is the Rinconada Shopping Center. It is broken into 3 parcels, but it's all part of that shopping center there. It's at the intersection of Pullard Road and Moore Avenue. It includes a grocery store, the Safeway there, as well as pharmacy, other local dining and neighborhood services. And these shopping centers, it's true for this one as well. We can stay on Union Avenue district. For these shopping centers, there hasn't necessarily been any indication of a desire for redevelopment, but the idea, if these were to redevelop, would be that they would continue to have those neighborhoods serving commercial uses, but be developed in a way that has additional housing as well. So this is the Union Avenue district. It's actually broken into, or including 2 different sites. We've got the Downing Center, which is the Safeway grocery shopping center there, labeled as I2. And then we have the corner of Los Gatos Almaden Road and Lee Avenue. And that one's included as well because we've actually received specific interest in redevelopment from that property owner. And then we get to the last district, and we're done with my presentation, which is the Harwood Road district. So this is the Blossom Hill Square Shopping Center that's on the corner of Blossom Hill Road and Harwood. This includes pharmacy, gas station, other local dining and neighborhood services. So similar to the previous small shopping centers, this is an area that, if there was interest from the property owner, could potentially be redeveloped as a mixed use center instead of just commercial. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Andy, who will talk some more about how to provide feedback on those potential sites.
Thank you, Jennifer. We're going to start by, again, just getting a feel for who's in the room. So we would appreciate it if you could raise your hand if you own or represent a site in discussion.
And we'll just do a quick reminder if anyone joined us late that the raise hand icon is in the center of your Zoom screen. If you can't see it for any reason, you may need to escape to exit out of the full view. And thank you.
I see a few people raising their hand. Thank you for letting us know. We value your opinions and hope that you'll correspond with us and let us know where you might like to go with this idea of being included on the sites list. So with that, we're going to now invite everyone to provide feedback on these potential sites. We have an opportunity within our website to make comments on individual sites. So you'll find on our website that there are each of the districts that Jennifer brought to our attention in this presentation. And when you click on each of them, you'll see the corresponding numbers and also an aerial map and just a brief description to help orient you. There's an opportunity to share with us what your feelings are for inclusion of that site with emoticons. And then there's also a place for you to tell us a little more about why you feel that way. So we want to, again, encourage property owners to consider filling out the property owner interest form. Help us understand if maybe your site was shared this evening and you'd like to share more information with us about your intentions, or maybe you have a single family zoned property and you're considering the SB9 opportunities. We're now going to share with you our interactive balancing act tool, and all of these sites that you saw this evening correspond directly with this tool, and I'm going to open it now. I'll first stop sharing so that I can bring us to and share again. There we go. So when you come to our website, which again is engagelosgatoshousing.com, here's the information about tonight's event. Here's the property owner interest form. Here's the site's overview as we just discussed. Here's some basic information about the housing element as an overview with opportunities to interact. And here is the balancing act. So when you click on this, it will bring you to the opening page where you can learn a little bit about how to use this. But tonight we're going to walk you through this, and I'm going to invite Rachel Kane, who helped develop this map, who really did all of the heavy lifting in developing this map. Rachel, are you with us? Are you able to join us?
I am.
Great.
Can everybody hear me okay? I've been getting messages that my internet is unstable. Great. Okay. Thanks, Andy. And thank you all for joining us tonight. First, I want to encourage you to look at this tool on a large screen. So if you're joining us this evening on your mobile, please come back when you can see this full screen. There's a lot of really interesting content here, and it's a really robust feature set. So come back when you have a large screen to look at it on. And like Andy said, you can find this tool by visiting the website at engagelosgatoshousing.com and then follow the links just like Andy showed you. So at the very top of the page, you'll see this slider bar with a number on it. That graphic represents the number of homes for which Los Gatos needs to make accommodations. So as you progress through the simulation tool, the bubble with the number will move from the left to the right. And when it hits 0 or above that, the red color will change to green. So your job is to allocate housing until the slider bar turns green. And it's actually pretty easy. So below the slider bar, you'll see a map of Los Gatos. And each shape on the map represents a site that has been identified for future housing opportunities that we all just went through. You'll see a button on the top left of the map to toggle between the two views, map and satellite. So play around with those views so that you can have a better idea of where each site is and if there's anything built there now. You can zoom in and out on this map by using the plus and minus buttons or zoom functions on your specific device. Each shape also includes a label, which corresponds to the list below. Click the shape to see the site on the list below. And when you increase and decrease the number of housing units in each shape, the color will get darker, representing a higher density. But more about that in a minute. Under the map, you'll see 2 columns. Thank you, Andy. The column on the left is the list of housing units or homes and the total number of housing units that the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, has determined that Los Gatos needs to accommodate. Click the down arrow to see that list. You can add a comment by clicking the red speech bubble in any row. The column on the right is a list of districts and sites available where more housing could be offered. The bar chart at the top represents each area and the number of housing units in each area. As you move the houses, the bar chart will change to help you see which area has a higher allocation than another. And you can click down the down arrow in any category to see the list of sites in that category. And in each site, you'll see, in each district, you'll see each site listed on its own row. The buttons on the left will allow you to increase and decrease the number of housing units in that site, as well as reset the numbers. The map button brings you directly to that site on the map for easy reference. The blue information button opens a window where you can read additional information, and the more details button shows images and hyperlinks to online resources related to the site. On the right, you'll see the same red speech bubble where you can leave a comment about the site. So when you're ready, dive in. Increase and decrease the number of housing units in areas that matter to you. Watch the map and the bar chart display your choices in real time. Once the red slider bar at the top of the page turns green, your job is complete. You can now click Submit at the bottom of the page to send your simulation in for consideration. So please play around with this tool and share it with your neighbors and friends so that they can have their input heard as well. Thank you very much. I'm back to you, Andy.
Thank you, Rachel. I just want to also maybe bring attention to some of the great additions that you made to this map that are a little outside of our standard. So we have included in here the pipeline projects, and that's why you see a number that is less than the 1,993. We have the pipeline projects, we have the ADUs set to the number that we know that we can project to in a way that HCD will accept. We also have this opportunity to add your own. Maybe there's a parcel, maybe there's a site with an address or an APN that you know that you would like to see included in this list. You can add a comment here and include that information. Rachel has also done a great job of including printable documents that you might find useful. We've got the a balancing act how-to guide. We've got the site summaries that you just saw on our website in a form that you could print out if that's a way that's easier for you to access this information. And here we have a key with all of the icons available within the map to understand and remind you all of the information that Rachel just shared with you. Here are links also to the background information. And you'll see within the background information, we also have a visual preference survey for what types of units that you would like to see within each of these sites. And that relates back to the zoning and density allowed for each of those locations.
And Andy, I just want to take a moment to tell our audience, we do recognize that sometimes audio goes in and out as our networks are strained. And if you have not heard exactly, this amazing technology can be found at Engage Los Gatos Housing.com. On the World Wide Web, that would be ENGATOSGATOSING. Engage Los Gatos Housing.com. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I will bring us back to the slideshow. We're going to have this tool available for the next month, and we'll be bringing forward all of the comments and preferences that you bring to us through our Housing Element Advisory Board meetings and Planning Commission meetings, and when we have our Town Council meetings, so that your voice will be incorporated as attachments, and that decision makers can see what your feelings are about these sites and what your experiences are. We honor and respect your lived experience as folks who either live in the town or would like to live in the town. And all of that is essential for us to better understand how to put this housing element together. So part 4, question and answer session. We'll now do live question and answers. And we're going to bring Kristen back to help us learn a little bit about the ground rules we'll be following this evening. Kristen?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. So this says ground rules. You can consider it a warm invitation. And your warm invitation is to speak from your own experience, to talk about what it is that you want, what you're concerned about. If you say we, sometimes that throws other people because we don't know who we is. So if you can speak from your own experience, and make an attempt to share space. So going for brevity, because some of us have ease of speaking into a room and others of us don't. That's often referred to as move forward. If you have a sense that your voice isn't often heard, then move back if you have ease of asking. So you can think about those blocks looking over the fence. You want to think, if it's easy for you to see over the fence, then just let somebody else go first. I want to encourage you to listen to understand what matters to each speaker, what they care about. If you listen for that, it's a lot easier than the kind of judgments that we can come to when we think we're hearing just a complaint. Because we aim for an atmosphere that's respectful of each person's dignity. During this entire process, we're hoping to build trust in your community that will last long beyond this housing element. So thank you for that. We're going to start with a few written questions that are still in the queue before we go to raising hands and live pieces. So the first question is for Andy, and that is, do housing units have to be rental or for purchase in order to be considered affordable?
Well, they can be either.
Okay. The second question is for Joel. How can the town attract developers to build affordable housing units?
Thank you for that question. So I think there's a number of broad tools, right? One of them are the development standards that we have in place, which may make it more feasible for them to develop than what our current regulations are. The other kind of big bucket would be some type of incentives. So, if you're providing affordable housing, maybe above and beyond what's already required, because the town does require affordable housing for developments that have more than 5 residential units. So that could be incentives. That really is a big bucket and a wide bucket. But really, those 2 buckets are probably the biggest influence off the top of my head. And so it's really, how can we set up the framework of our regulations to encourage development where maybe in the past it hasn't been feasible. And that could also be coupled with incentives to encourage affordable housing as well.
Wonderful, thank you, Joel. And one more written question right now, and that one's for Andy. Can accessory dwelling units be counted towards satisfying the regional housing needs allocation? And there are a couple of sub questions for that. So
Okay, yes, the short answer is yes. But a little more nuanced answer is we know what that projection formula is that HCD will accept, and we've discovered that results in about 200 ADUs. So we can anticipate and incorporate, and we have in our map exercise, our balancing act that we just shared, that we've already credited ourselves with those 200 ADUs.
Okay, great. And the 2 sub pieces of that are, do they have to be deed restricted? And what are the potential incentives for property owners to build ADUs?
They do not have to be deed restricted. And there's actually, we've also received guidance about how we may be able to distribute ADUs among the different categories. And not to get too much in the weeds, but I'll say just quickly, it's 30, 30, 30, and 10. So 30% very low, 30% low, 30% moderate, and 10% above moderate. So that's where we'll be categorizing those. It is true that the town could have an option to anticipate even more ADUs, and to do so, they would need to consider expanding, or I should say relaxing regulations around ADUs, or incentivizing more ADUs through either regulations or a number of different opportunities. I don't know that the town is thinking that way.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. So the town, obviously all jurisdictions in California had to modify their ADU rules significantly starting around 2017, 2018, due to state law. We have actually a pretty lenient ADU regulation, so we do encourage them. And if you look back at our past development of ADUs before those regulations, if we had 2 or 3 a year, it was a big number. Now for starting 2018 probably, we have more than 25 a year that we're getting to building permit issuance. So we are regulation wise seeing a lot more units than were previously allowed under our regulations. We actually do have a opportunity in our ADU regulations to create an incentive program. And so that could take a number of different paths, depending on what types of incentives and what guarantees we'd be looking for on our end. That hasn't been developed to date, but that is something that probably will come up again during this housing element cycle as a program or an implementation program that we might need to reconsider and put some specific metrics and timing on.
Wonderful, thank you, Joel. So we do have some more written questions, but we're going to hold those back because we're going to prioritize some live questions. Again, remembering the ground rules / invitations. And I believe that I don't know if Tamala, if you want to say anything about that process, that you'll be unmuting people.
Yes, thank you. So first, it's important that you find the raise hand icon and raise your hand. That's how I'll know that you'll have a question to ask. And then I will unmute you, and you will also have to unmute yourself if you've muted on your side. And then you're welcome to ask your question. We do ask that you keep it brief so we can get through all of them, of course, same meeting rules as you usually hear. And this would be the time to go ahead and raise your hand. And I do see a few hands raised. It looks like the first is J, first initial. Jay, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and speak.
Yes, hi, it's Jane Sun and Shine. I live on the west side of Los Gatos, and I'm bordered with Monte Sereno, Saratoga, and Campbell. So the Pollard Road property, what often happens, I find, is that each town is acting independent of the others, but there is already some zoning considerations that are going to happen on Quito Road in Pollard. There's a large, and so Saratoga has 2 big parcels that are going to impact that intersection as they continue on in the process. And because those are both vacant land, I guarantee you there's going to be some development because the owners of the land are looking to do development. And so the zoning is already in the process of looking at being increased. And I just urge Los Gatos in this process to consider that all of us that live in the canyon off of Quito Boulevard between Highway 9 and Pollard depend on Pollard Road for our transportation. And also there are a number of schools that kids are walking, the whole Quito Pollard Road, the Safeway shopping center is not that far away, and it could cause even more severe bottlenecking for the families, mine included, that live south of Pollard off of Quito Road. Quito Road is our primary access point. So when you're considering the mixed use and the higher density on that Safeway shopping center, I really hope that you take into consideration what is currently already being approved by Saratoga, just a half a mile away, that's going to impact Pollard Road already.
So it sounds like you really want to make sure that the municipalities are in communication with one another and considering your neighborhood specifically in terms of safety and impact. Yes?
I'm sorry, could you, I said to unmute again. Yeah, it's the traffic dilemma and the safety of the pedestrians, because Keto Road cannot be widened south of Pollard, and Pollard Road is already as wide as it's going to get, and it has to accommodate a lot of different kinds of traffic, because for us to get to the hospitals and to the medical side of Los Gatos, we depend on Pollard Road to get to Lark Road. So we're really stuck, because Highway 9 is not a solution for us either.
Yeah, I think so.
So,
I
yeah.
caught it for you. Yeah.
So please, we're not, insulated. We do need to consider what's happening currently with the housing plan that Saratoga is already steps ahead of you in identifying the sites and talking about what they want to do with zoning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our next question will come from Lee. Lee, go ahead and unmute your mic, please.
Thank you, Lee Fago. I have basically two questions. The first one is, for each of these sites that you've identified on the map, does it list what the height limit is for each of those sites? I know, like for the post office, which was mentioned, it's a 45-foot height, but in other areas it's a 35-foot height. So if that could be identified on each of these sites, it would help give perspective. Also, the density that is being considered for those different sites would be helpful for people who are looking to see what is possible, what's feasible, and how this would fit together. The second part of my question, or the second question, is the infrastructure needs that are, as was discussed a little earlier tonight, is that it was going to be site-specific infrastructure review to determine the infrastructure requirements. I think that's good, but it's only part of the equation. We should also look at the infrastructure overall and in the region of where these houses are being done, because it's draining on the same resources that have to accommodate for any site-specific infrastructure needs. So that's my two questions or comments, if you will.
Lee, I'm not sure whether that's an Andy or a Joel set of questions.
So I thank you for your comments, Mr. Fago. And we appreciate that. I will say that I don't believe heights are indicated on the Balancing Act. I think we're really looking for a number of units that are going to be affected, obviously. So you might end up with a site where you want to, maximize that height, maximize that density or number of units. And so that's something that will get taken into account a little farther down the line. I know you've been really engaged in the general plan process, so that's really helpful. As you mentioned, currently the maximum height in any of our land use designations is 45 feet. As you mentioned, right now, I think that's proposed for the boulevard, the mixed use sites, and then obviously downtown, which already currently is 45. The other ones are typically capped at 35 for the commercial, but we'll go back through and look at that, see if that's something that we can add to the tool quickly. But otherwise, I would point folks back to that general plan designation in the land use element, which will have all of those particulars. And again, we'll look to see if those are things we can add quickly, like tomorrow or Monday at the latest, and then we'll go from there. But appreciate the comments.
And next, we do have a question from Brent. Brent, you can please unmute yourself and ask the question.
My question is on parcels that are currently zone residential. If you have a large parcel that's zone residential that could accommodate more than one ADU, has any consideration been given to allowing someone who can build a studio or one bedroom units on that property?
Thank you, Mr. Ventura. So yeah, currently we allow an ADU with the house, and then we also allow what's called the junior ADU, which is an ADU that is 500 square feet or less. There isn't anything currently in our current regulations. There are possibility of what's termed missing middle housing. That is in the current draft general plan, but that would necessitate an increase of the density for those sites. And so ultimately, we'll be having those conversations with the Planning Commission starting on April 13th, and then ultimately after they're finished with their review and provide a recommendation, then the town council will consider that as well. So I encourage you to reach out to planning staff for the general plan. We can point you to that missing middle conversation. And if you'd like to provide input to Planning Commission and or council, that would be appreciated.
And I do need to take just a moment to remind our phone-in callers that you also can ask questions. *9 to raise your hand, and we can unmute you and you can ask via phone. And to everyone joining us via computer, raise hand icon, bottom center of your screen. Now is your time.
And if we don't have more hands raised, I can ask additional written questions. Is that true, Tamala? That we're
Yes, we have no more raised hands at this time.
great. Well, I encourage any of you who have questions to still raise your hand, but meanwhile, I will ask a couple of these. So this question, probably answered by Andy, maybe Joel. Would a current property owner whose site is selected be expected to receive less than fair market value for their property?
So I can speak to that, but it would not be an objective statement. The housing element being chosen as a site in no way requires you to develop housing on that site, so it should not impact your property value at all. There is a possibility with the mixed use project that they actually impact it positively, but that's something that would be determined down the line, but it doesn't preclude you or impact your property value from.
Great, thank you. And this question probably is for you, Joel. When trees are removed for new housing, will those trees be moved or additional trees be replanted?
Thank you. The town does have a tree protection ordinance, and typically, whether it's a single family home that's being redeveloped, and they need to remove trees, if they're over a certain size, they're called protected trees, and the town has a two-pronged approach. Either you replant based on a chart depending on the size of the tree you removed, and so typically it's a number of trees for any one tree, again depending on size. If you have a site, for instance, a single family home where you may have a large tree that is in poor health or dying, and it would require an exorbitant amount of trees that frankly from good arboricultural practices couldn't possibly be planted on the site, then there is also an in lieu option where you pay an in lieu fee depending on the size of the tree replacement that's required, and that goes into a fund, and the town Parks and Public Works Department uses that to revitalize and replant our urban forest.
And Kristen, I do see a few more hands raised.
Yeah, let's go back to that.
The first is Chris. Chris, please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, in regard to the Pollard Road Safeway site, it is imperative to interact with the adjacent cities, as a previous person had mentioned. But in addition, the Safeway parcel is serviced by Campbell schools, both at the elementary and the high school level. And I know that a long time ago, when we were working on the North 40, the developers had to interact with the Los Gatos School District. And I'm worried, at least in that case, they all belong to the same town. In this situation, if you're looking at developing the Pollard Road Safeway site, how is that going to impact both Marshall Lane School, certainly Rolling Hills, which is directly across the street from the Safeway site? And I mean, if we have difficulty within our own district, how are we really going to coordinate with the other school districts involved? And I want it noted that it's imperative to do so.
Okay, I'm hearing that you really want to make sure that the impact on schools and districts is noted and coordinated between municipalities.
Yes, particularly since it's Campbell schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I see Catherine. Catherine, your hand is raised, and please do unmute yourself and ask your question.
Great, thanks. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'm kind of cutting out on my end, but so I was curious if all of you had, I was really actually intrigued and inspired by the sites that you presented tonight. So I wanted to just understand, have you actively reached out to the property owners of most of those sites, or is that still to come? That's my first part of my question. And the second part of my question is, I was under the impression that in the last RHNA cycle, we had identified some of those sites as possible locations where we could build housing, and we did not fulfill that obligation, or we didn't fulfill, the fact that we said we were going to. So those sites were no longer viable because they did not meet certain criteria. So I just wanted to hear those answers.
Is that an Andy answer or a Joel?
Joel, I'll give you
I'm
first,
happy to
right?
start.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So Ms. Summers, no, we haven't reached out to the property owners. That's that property interest form that we were mentioning. We will be sending it to all of the property owners that we are currently have on the potential sites inventory map. Related to the sites that were used in the previous cycle, we're not precluded from using them. The two that pop into my mind are the Affordable Housing Overlay Zone site up off Knowles, and then the sites off of Oka. Those were in the last housing element site cycle. And so we'll have to be providing a lot more justification on the viability of including those in a second cycle. And there's some precedent for that in other jurisdictions in Southern California and Sacramento region who are going through it. They've been going through it about a year or two earlier than us. Not many of them have been successful, frankly, since I believe all of theirs were due last October, I want to say. And so, ultimately, that's something where we're going to try to include those if that's something that ultimately the Public Housing Element Advisory Board, Planning Commission, and finally Council decide to include in that site's inventory.
Great, thank you, Joel.
And I do see Arvin has a question. Arvin, please, it is your turn. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. The state has published an SB9 fact sheet. I'm not sure if this was discussed earlier in the meeting or not, but I'd like to know when the town of Los Gatos is going to take that up and consider and review and discuss that.
Thank you, Arvin. So I will jump in on that one. So the town actually has a current urgency ordinance for SB9. So we did put in place an urgency ordinance with some interim requirements to deal with SB9. We are familiar with that so-called fact sheet. I did mention that early on in the meeting. There's a lot of caveats that it's really for informational purposes only and not strong guidance. But ultimately, the town will be initiating an effort to create a permanent ordinance where we actually put those regulations into our zoning code and potentially some of our other subdivision code, but we're still working on that. That effort is probably going to kick off in the next, I would say, either April or May-ish timeframe, and we will definitely be reaching out via our social media and other channels. And so again, another plug for the Notify Me. If you go on the town's website, you can opt in to get notifications as far as on a number of different topics, but that definitely will be a topic to look out for. And you also can just every once in a while, if you're not interested in that opportunity, you can check the planning division's webpage and the town's main webpage, because we will undoubtedly have information on that effort as we move forward.
Thank you, Joel. So I'm going to go to a couple of written questions. This first one probably directed to Joel. I see that the Pollard Shopping Center and Blossom Hill Square Shopping Center have been selected as a site. Is redevelopment expected?
Thank you. Again, we haven't reached out to gauge interest. Obviously, it's challenging, and we're going to have a lot of work on our hands in conjunction with our consultants to try to provide justification for those sites, absent, those property interest forms. If those owners show interest, then that might be helpful, but they may ultimately not make it onto our site list if we can't justify them as a possibility of being redeveloped in the next 8 years. Again, that's kind of an iterative process that we'll go through, and we'll gauge that interest after we do that kind of initial round, and we may have to do follow-up rounds of interest either with our sites that we currently have or other potential sites in those commercial designations that aren't currently in our sites inventory.
Great. And Joel, has the vacant property located on the corner of Alberta Way and Highway 9, where a new office building was approved, been considered as a potential site for housing?
It has not been considered for a potential site. There actually is a approved office building there. They've demolished the site. It's been sitting for a while. And we actually just received resubmitted building permit plans. So they've been in the building permit process for a while, but they just resubmitted actually earlier this month in March. And so we'll be going through that plan review. We've reached out to the property owner to just make sure that they still plan to move forward with that. And the intention thus far is that they do plan to utilize those entitlements. Should that change while we're going through this process, then we would probably reevaluate that opportunity.
Great, thank you. And again for Joel, has an application been submitted for phase 2 of the North 40 specific plan area?
Thank you. As Ms. Armour mentioned earlier, we did have a conceptual development advisory committee application. For those in the audience, that is kind of pre-submitting an actual real application. We often encourage any types of developments for the specific plan area itself. It actually is required that if you're going to do any commercial development, you have to go through that process. So we did look at the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee did look at a mixed use proposal. And so whether or not that moves forward to an actual application, that we'll wait to see if that comes to fruition, but an actual planning application for entitlements has not been submitted to date.
Great, thank you. I want to encourage people, again, if you have questions you want to ask live, then you can raise your hand. But meanwhile, we will do something, we'll keep answering the questions that you've submitted in writing, which probably will please some of you, the ones who asked it, certainly. So this question to Joel, will the housing element consider minimum open space requirements?
So the housing element isn't really the appropriate tool for minimum open space requirements. That's something that would better be served in either our general plan and or zoning code and or residential or commercial design guidelines. So those are things that have been expressed through the general plan process. That was kind of the first one where that was a requirement, frankly, was the North 40 specific plan. We do have a minimum requirement for open space and green open space of some percentage of that total open space. So that is, and I don't recall off the top of my head, but we'll definitely look into that. But I believe that's something that is at least an implementation program, if not a policy in the current draft general plan. And I'll confirm that with staff.
Great, thank you. And one more, Joel. You're earning your keep here. How does the increase in housing units relate to an increase in the school population? And will the housing element consider school populations? There's a lot of interest in that. We heard from other live calls.
Yeah, thank you. So kind of a little bit at the end, but I think the genesis was schools and impacts to schools. Those impacts have been looked at through our general plan update. So again, look at the draft 2040 general plan and the final EIR. There were not any significant impacts identified from schools. I haven't spoken directly with the schools recently, but I know we've heard from members of the public that school enrollment is actually declining in certain cases. So that's something that ultimately the state has a framework through SB 50 whereby depending on the development, they have to pay fees to the school, which the state deems as appropriate mitigation for new student population. So that is the bare minimum they have to do. And so ultimately, that is how those topics are mitigated as it relates to schools.
Great. So once again, I want to encourage people, if they have live questions, then you can raise your hand. And taking a cue from Lee from earlier, you can take a breath. You've been listening and watching Zoom for a significant amount of time. Some of you have been doing it all day. So just take a breath and see if you have a question that hasn't been addressed or a concern that you really want to notice. I even want to encourage you to think, oh, have you heard something from someone else that you hadn't thought of, that you learned something about somebody else's perspective in terms of caring for yourself and your neighbors and your community? You might have gotten a window into something that you hadn't known before.
I do see a hand raised.
Great.
Susan, please go ahead with your question.
Yes, hi. I was just thinking, we're talking about how many units we're, I think, what is it, 1,993, something like that. And of course, we're going to have buffer added onto that. But then what size are we talking about here? 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom units, or 3 bedroom? What each unit, I mean, or each, housing, I guess the housing unit we're talking about, how big are they supposed to be? Are they varied sizes, or I'm trying to figure out how many people we're talking about eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my question.
Thank you, Ms. Burnett. Yeah, so thank you, Ms. Burnett. So the town doesn't regulate number of bedrooms. We do have regulations as it relates to FAR and things of that magnitude. But it would be we would hope it would be a variety of different product types. Historically, most of the units that we've seen in town are don't actually add to the housing stock. It's generally tear downs and rebuilds, as you're familiar with. But ultimately, we're hoping to, again, speaking to the conversation earlier, we really want to try to broaden where we can different opportunities for different products types, which will be more inclusive and give folks who may not be able to afford a single family home on a single family lot in town opportunities to move into town. So we envision that it will be a variety of different types of housing, whether that's townhomes, condos, apartments. There will be some probably single family. You have duplexes, triplexes, row homes. There's a variety of different product types, and some of that will be dictated by the site itself and what the developer can develop under the parameters of both the general plan at the time and the zoning code. But we do envision a variety, and we currently don't control the number of rooms for those types of units, other than on the periphery and not to get in the weeds. Currently, we have different parking requirements for condos or apartments, things like that.
Thank you, Joel. And I see Lee Quintana, your hand. I believe you can unmute to ask your question.
I believe Lee.
So Ms. Quintana,
go ahead.
Oh,
yeah, Ms. Quintana generally can't utilize Zoom, even though we unmute her, we can't hear her. What we typically need to do is promote her to a panelist. So I can do that at this time. 1 second, Ms. Quintana. Lee, if you want to unmute yourself, then you should be able to speak now. Can't hear you.
Perhaps we can take another question and we'll let Lee see if that we can open that mic. I see that Kristen has a hand raised. Kristen? And Kristen also is using an older form of Zoom. So one moment, Kristen. And Kristen, please go ahead and ask your question.
Christine, if you want to unmute yourself, you're currently muted.
And
I found it. Yay.
there you go. I was just going to say it's on the left-hand corner if you're having trouble finding it.
Well, actually, mine was in the center screen.
Oh,
but
okay.
that's
There. Wouldn't have helped you anyway.
Hi. I live on Parr Avenue. And so on the corner of Capri and Knowles, there is a county property that has been vacant for many, many years. Is there possibilities for that property to be engaged at all in this program through the county? Or do you even know where that property is?
Thank you, Christine. I believe you're talking about the old courthouse property.
Yes.
That actually is on our site's inventory as one of our sites.
Awesome.
I will let you know that El Camino Hospital actually owns that property now. The county surplus that property and the property behind it where they built those homes.
Yes.
But El Camino currently owns that property, but it is on our site's inventory.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Sorry about that. My question has to do with the fact that we don't currently control the number of bedrooms or the sizes of homes, but we did have some controls in the North 40, and we do have controls on ADU sizes. So my question is, we don't currently have the controls, but is there anything that would prevent us to adding to the zoning code and the general plan considerations regarding the size of units? We do have language in the draft general plan that encourages smaller units, and it even talks about tiny units, but there's nothing to back it up. So that's my question. Because my secondary question is, if the owners have to be amenable to having their sites on the site inventory, and there aren't enough owners who wish to redevelop their sites, what does that mean for the few sites that might remain on the inventory in terms of the density and height, etc., intensity of the use?
Thank you, Ms. Quintana. So yes, as you mentioned, there's some language in the draft general plan. Really, it probably would be a product type control from a bedroom perspective. I think the challenge gets to be sometimes we want to have that variety. We hear a lot, specifically in our BMP program on the rental side. You know, we really only have 1 and 2 bedroom units predominantly. And so if you have a family, that's, you know, if you have, you know, more than probably 4 folks in your family, then that's not really going to be accommodated by that. So we do hear a lot of folks who are interested in larger rentals, but you know, ultimately that would be a conversation with probably the town attorney as far as making sure we're not dealing with any fair housing laws or, you know, going afoul of those. But that's something we could look at to see if maybe based on product type. Again, I'm thinking condo, apartment, townhome potentially. Those are things that we can look at. To your second point, a property owner doesn't have to say, yes, I want to be on the inventory. That we imagine there'll probably be a lot of property owners who won't be interested in responding one way or the other. But should your theory pan out and let's just go close to worst case scenario, 95% of these sites, all of the property owners say, no, I'm not interested in development. Then we're going to have an even bigger mountain to climb than we already do, as you're aware.
So we've got a question that's maybe a general plan question, but it does seem important, that came in, and it was reported in July last year that Los Gatos officials were actually recommending 3,783 housing units within the next 20 years. Where does that higher recommendation stand now, and what are the next steps?
So that is related to the general plan. The housing element is an 8-year cycle. The general plan is a 20-year cycle. We will begin having additional conversations. We've been having those conversations for the past year plus. We'll continue those conversations with Planning Commission and the council, and there's a chance that Planning Commission and or council could recommend that what's in the current draft general plan be modified. So they could suggest, in this designation, I don't think the density should be raised, or in this designation, I don't think it should be raised that much. So those conversations are still out there. I'd encourage you to submit comments related to the general plan. Again, we're going to begin those conversations with the Planning Commission on April 13th at a Planning Commission meeting. So I encourage you to write and or attend so that you can provide those comments either in writing and or via Zoom. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we're coming to the end of our Q&A time, and I just want to note that there are questions that will be answered on the website. So please don't consider this the end of your opportunity to voice questions, concerns, comments, any of that. And that you can also ask questions about the website, and those will be answered as well. So I think I hand it to Andy at this point for some final slides.
Thank you, Kristen. And thank you everybody who participated and bravely brought their voice either through typing in a question or speaking up with a question or comment. This is all valuable information, and we hope to continue the conversation. We want to bring forward our shared goals for the housing element process. As your representatives, as your consultants, we will be working together with town staff and with the people of Los Gatos to represent the town's core values, represent the town's vision of future housing, create a more inclusive Los Gatos community, while also meeting regional and state mandated housing goals. We're going to move on now to a live poll. And we want to encourage everyone today to think about what actions you might consider taking to share your knowledge about the housing element update. Choices we have here today: maybe have a conversation with a friend, share the website with a friend, share the balancing act tool with a friend, or hopefully all of the above. In sharing how the balancing act works, we're hoping that many of you will consider becoming ambassadors for sharing how this process works and how you can better inform us through your community about where your preferences are for that future housing.
And we'll just do one quick reminder. If you can't find the poll, which we're talking about, you may need to hit the escape button out of your full screen, and you will see which action will you take to share your knowledge about the housing element update.
I see some exciting numbers. I see 60% of the people who are answering so far are saying all of the above. This is great. The more robust engagement we can have throughout this process, the more confident we can be about this final policy document truly reflecting what the community would like to see for the vision of the future of Los Gatos.
And we will end this poll in 3 seconds. Please make your final choices. We will end in 3, 2, and 1. And
Thank you,
there's some
Tamala.
exciting results.
Great. You want to talk through it quickly, Tamala?
Absolutely. Thank you. It looks like 29% are going to have a conversation with a friend. That's a pretty high number, I thought. 4% are going to share the website with a friend. That is engagelosgatos.com. Share the balancing act with a friend. 7% are going to share the balancing act, and 61% are going to do all of the above. Thank you.
Thank you. We want to announce to everyone, and maybe Jennifer, would you like to share this slide? All of these upcoming events?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, we have a number of different things that are going to be happening in the coming weeks. So on this slide, we actually have a special joint study session that's going to be occurring. And oh, Andy, we lost it.
Sorry. Sorry about that.
It's important information for people to see as I'm saying it verbally.
Yes.
So next week on April 6th, we're going to be having a special joint study session. That's going to be Town Council, Planning Commission, and the Housing Element Advisory Board all coming together to hear a discussion about affordable housing and some of the difficulties in developing affordable housing in the town and how that works. So going into some of those difficult topics, but very closely related to future discussions we'll have as to how we can enable housing in the town and in the development of the housing element. We also have the Housing Element Advisory Board is next scheduled for April 21st. We have that meeting scheduled 3 weeks out because we want to give everyone enough time to participate in the online engagement that we've talked about, the Balancing Act tonight, so that we can take some of those results, those initial thoughts and comments from the community, and share those with the Housing Element Advisory Board. In addition, I will add, it's not on this slide, but as our Director Paulson has mentioned, we do have the draft 2040 general plan scheduled to go to Planning Commission for its initial review and their consideration. And that is going to be on April 13th. So keep an eye on the town's website for more information about each of those meetings. Generally, we will be posting online on the Friday before the meeting some additional information, written information, and we welcome public comments for any of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We also want to thank everybody for showing up tonight, for taking time out of your busy schedule and learning more about the housing element and how you might be able to be engaged and help us understand what is important to you as we unfold and create this housing element draft. Joel, would you like to take us out?
Thank you, Annie. I just want to reiterate, I appreciate everyone's participation. This is an ongoing process, as with the general plan. So please continue to be engaged. Should you have questions, there's always opportunities from the website, and/or you can feel free to reach out to planning staff on any topic, not just the housing element or general plan. But if you have other questions, that's what we're here to do, is help folks. And again, please get the word out. The more people that participate in these types of efforts really lead to the best outcome typically. So definitely encourage that. Appreciate everyone's time tonight, and thank our consultants and all of the panelists that we had and all the behind the scenes folks. But again, thank you for participating, and we look forward to you participating in the future. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. It looks like that's the end of the show. And so enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yes, sorry. And thank you, everyone. That does finish our meeting today. The Town of Los Gatos housing element. Please do visit us at engagelosgatoshousing.com. Find that wonderful balancing tool, the answers to the questions posed today, and all the other wonderful information that we did go over. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.